Hello and welcome back to my channel. Today we are filming in my library, so welcome to my favorite room in the house. When I had initially first started my channel, it was not my intention to only do Federalist videos. It just became a project that I became very focused on. But today I actually wanted to take you through a few books that I feel have changed the way that I understand the world, the way that I look at things, my perspective, if you will. That's what I'm going to be talking about today. And if any of the books that I talk about do pique your interest and you are interested in purchasing them, I will leave an affiliate link so you can buy them on Amazon below. But with that being said, let's just get right into it. So this first book I'm going to talk about came to me in a time in my life when I was really into personal development culture, because I was a sales trainer and a big part of my job was motivating people. So the book is Start With Why by Simon Sinek. And the reason that I chose to put this book first on my list is that I had read a lot, and I mean a lot, of these personal development books at this time in my life. I don't really pick them up as often anymore, but of all of the books that I read, I think the one that has resonated with me the most and that has been top of mind since then, and I really believe has changed the way that I approach life in general, is this book. And the reason for that is because of this one central idea that he introduces in chapter 3 called the Golden Circle. And Sinek says this about the Golden Circle. The concept of the Golden Circle was inspired by the Golden Ratio, a simple mathematical relationship that has fascinated mathematicians, biologists, architects, artists, musicians, and naturists since the beginning of history. And what is the Golden Circle? Well, on the outside, you have the what. And Sinek says that the what is very easy. Most people, most businesses can explain what it is that they do. The next one in is how. And Sinek says that this is often given as an explanation as to why something is different or better. He says quite a few more things as well to kind of really bring it all together. But I am so excited to get to the most important circle, which is the why. And this is the crucial circle right in the middle. And to explain why, this is what Sinek says. Very few people or companies can clearly articulate why they do what they do. And when I say why, I don't mean to make money. That's a result. By why, I mean, what is your purpose, cause, or belief? Why does your company exist? Why do you get out of bed every morning? And why should anyone care? And I think to really highlight this idea and why it's so important to put why first, Simon Sinek shares a really interesting story about the railroad companies back in the 1800s. So I'm going to read this passage to you about the railroad company. Consider the classic business school case of the railroads. In the late 1800s, the railroads were the biggest companies in the country. Having achieved such monumental success, even changing the landscape of America, remembering why stopped being important to them. Instead, they became obsessed with what they did. They were in the railroad business. This narrowing of perspective influenced their decision-making. They invested all their money in tracks and cross ties and engines. But at the beginning of the 20th century, a new technology was introduced, the airplane. And all those big railroad companies eventually went out of business. What if they had defined themselves as being in the mass transportation business? Perhaps their behavior would have been different. Perhaps they would have seen opportunities that they otherwise missed. Perhaps they would own all the airlines today. So this next book, I think I remember reading it as a kid. I can't exactly be sure, but in any case, I read it again a couple of years ago, right when I was starting college, because it had been quite a long time since I'd ever had to write papers. I started college 10 years after I finished high school, so it had been a while. And so I picked up this book called On Writing Well by William Zinsner. I do think it's absolutely made me a better writer, and now that I have it in my hands again, I feel like it's due for me to reread it. There's this one chapter that I think has really resonated with me and helped me on my reading journey and just finding and appreciating good prose, good nonfiction prose. And it all started with this one chapter in the book. It's chapter 15 called Science and Technology. And in this chapter, he gives credit where credit is due, absolutely. He even mentions a couple of books that I have in my library, one of them being The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat by Oliver Sacks, a very interesting book that I've read a couple of chapters out of, but I could even dive into that one if you guys want me to. It's a really good book. But he also calls out science and technology writers on being notoriously bad writers. For instance, he says about 98% of people who hold a doctorate in physics can't write their way out of a petri dish. But that's not because they can't. It's because they won't. They won't deign to learn to use the simple tools of the English language, precision instruments as refined as any that are used in a physics lab. And I think that this really struck me when I read that at the time, because I just started reading more scholarly text, journal articles, and just, I think, a higher level of material than I had been used to reading before that. And I was beginning to get frustrated because there was some stuff that I wasn't understanding. And, obviously part of it is not having an education in that field, but then there was the fact that it was just kind of difficult to follow along. And I think that reading this chapter and this paragraph in particular kind of helped me to see that maybe it's not necessarily because I'm stupid or I don't have the education to understand what the overall idea of this paper is. Maybe it's because it's just bad writing. So Zinsner explains that in order to be a good writer in one of these fields, you have to be a clear thinker, you have to have a passion for your subject, you need to write like a person, not write like a scientist, and that at the end of the day, it's just a matter of putting one sentence after another, but that after, however, is very crucial. So I would say that all in all, this book really gave me a passion for seeking out quality nonfiction writing and appreciating quality nonfiction writing, and especially those in the fields that maybe it wouldn't necessarily even be expected. So that's what I think I got out of this book and what's helped me to see the world, and my reading possibilities have opened up to me in that way. So I don't even know where to start with this next one, because almost every page has notes, underlines, circles, squares, rectangles. It blew my mind the first time that I read it. This book is Discrimination and Disparities by Thomas Sowell, and it is the first Thomas Sowell book that I ever read. Need I say more? I must confess that at one time I did try to make a video about this book in particular because it had such an impact on me, and I was like, I gotta tell people about this. But I had no idea where to start. I was trying to paraphrase and take pieces out, and I just could not figure out where to start because every sentence he included was important. But I did manage to select, I think, a really centralized idea that helped me to see politicians in a new light and see policymakers in a new light. And that is this passage right here. He says, "Among the many dangers of surrogate decision-making is that such decision-makers cannot know the situation of millions of other people as well as those people know their own situations, which may not conform to the vision prevailing among the surrogates. Moreover, surrogate decision-makers often pay no price for being wrong, no matter how wrong or how catastrophic the consequences for those whose decisions they have preempted. Given the fallibility of all human beings, the chastening effect of facing the consequences of one's decisions can be dispensed with only at great peril." And this, to me, is the single greatest argument in support of a free market economy rather than a planned economy. And I think that this is actually a really good follow-up on the chapter that I just read in On Writing Well, because he writes so clearly and so deliberately that I have such trouble paraphrasing what he said because he said it the most efficient way possible. So you can't restate what he says any better than he has already said it. And I have since begun to gather quite a collection of Thomas Sowell books. I shared it on my Instagram recently. If you're following me there, then you would have seen it there. And so I have read a lot more since then. And I can't remember if I chose to pursue an economics major rather than a business admin major because of Sowell, or if I found Sowell right around the time that I chose to do that. But what I do know for sure is that reading Thomas Sowell has ignited a passion about the subject for me. I have begun reading about economists in history like, Frederick Hayek, Milton Friedman, even, Karl Marx with a more academic perspective in a more academic light. He's just such an interesting person. He's had a really incredibly interesting childhood. He was a Marxist for a short while in his young adulthood. I recently read his memoir, Personal Odyssey. I read his biography by Jason Riley called Maverick. Amazing. He's just a really all-around, incredibly interesting person. I could probably go on all day about him. If you are interested in me talking more about my love for Thomas Sowell's writing and perspective and worldview, I'd definitely be happy to make a video just on that. Let me know in the comments. But I think that unless I just want to make this a Thomas Sowell video, we'll move on to the next book. This is another book that now that I have it in my hands again, I feel like it's due for a reread. This is The Black Swan by Nassim Nicholas Taleb. I also read this for the first time around the beginning of my college experience, and looking back now, I think that I don't know that I knew enough to fully grasp everything that he was saying, but nonetheless, there was one particular idea that has stayed with me and made a really big impression on me. I think that the biggest takeaway that I have from this book is that no matter how much you know, you are never going to know enough to know exactly what's going to happen in the future. You will never be able to know the future 100%. There's always going to be some variables that you didn't take into account, or some factor that you couldn't have even imagined that you needed to consider. And so therefore, you can never predict the future with 100% accuracy. And I think he really described it in a way that I understood it and grasped it in a way that I never had prior to reading his book. Here's how Taleb explains it. He says, "The problem with prediction is a little more subtle. It comes mainly from the fact that we are living in extremistan, not mediocristan. Our predictors may be good at predicting the ordinary, but not the irregular. And this is where they ultimately fail. All you need to do is miss one interest rates move from 6% to 1% in a longer term projection, which is what happened between 2000 and 2001, to have all your subsequent forecasts rendered completely ineffectual in correcting your cumulative track record. What matters is not how often you are right, but how large your cumulative errors are. Furthermore, economic forecasters tend to fall closer to one another than to the resulting outcome. Nobody wants to be off the wall." I guess that the biggest takeaway that I've had from this book and from this idea is that while it is incredibly useful to study history, apply that understanding to today, your intuition on what's happening in the present and being able to adapt to current circumstances and being able to make sound decisions, even when history might tell you to do otherwise, making a decision that's good for you right now is just as important, if not more so important, at being successful in the future, moving forward in whatever you do. Because I would argue that if you had to make do with just one or the other, you either had knowledge of the past or you had a really cunning ability at adapting to present circumstances, that if you had to just make do with one, I would take the latter any day. I think that your chances at success would be a lot higher with just that skill, even if you don't know anything about the past. There's a lot more interesting ideas in this book that I think are worth talking about. Like I said, I think it's time for a reread because now that I have a little bit more practical knowledge of statistics and better understanding, I think that I could probably glean a lot more from this book. But regardless, I really enjoyed reading it the first time, and it did make quite an impact on me. So this next book I was introduced to in an anthropology class that I took my very first semester of college. I don't know if you're sensing a theme here that my Great Awakening took place right around the time I decided to go back to school. This book is Guns, Germs, and Steel by Jared Diamond. And fun fact, Dr. Diamond actually is a professor at my university at UCLA, and he does teach some classes here. So basically, this book is a short account of human history as a whole. It's 13,000 years of human history, and so he walks through it. This is how he starts the book. This book attempts to provide a short history of everybody for the last 13,000 years. The question motivating the book is, why did history unfold differently on different continents? In case this question immediately makes you shudder at the thought that you are about to read a racist treaty, you aren't. As you will see, the answers to the question don't involve human racial differences at all. The book's emphasis is on the search for ultimate explanations and on pushing back the chain of historical causation as far as possible. So in the course of carrying out this really very detailed process of recounting human history, I felt like as I was reading, my perspective on human evolution and my belief system surrounding human evolution changed. It went from believing that our evolution is like an upward linear progression to now thinking of it as more cyclical, for lack of a better word, because I don't even think that we have the word in our vernacular to properly describe what it is. Because at the end of the day, we know, of course, a lot more now today than we did 13,000 years ago, 50,000 years ago, whenever. But people back then also know a lot or knew a lot that we don't know today. So it's a cycle of information, and it just kind of made me think of things differently in that regard. And I think that he has a really interesting story that illustrates this quite well. It's about a couple of people, a policeman, an Irish policeman, Robert Burke, and the English astronomer, William Wills. They were the ill-fated leaders of the first European expedition to cross Australia from south to north. Setting out with 6 camels, packing food enough for 3 months, Burke and Wills ran out of provisions while in the desert of North Menindee. 3 successive times they encountered and were rescued by well-fed Aborigines, whose home was that desert, and who plied the explorers with fish, fern cakes, and roasted fat rats. But then Burke foolishly shot his pistol at one of the Aborigines, whereupon the whole group fled. Despite their big advantage over the Aborigines in possessing guns with which to hunt, Burke and Will starved, collapsed, and died within a month after the Aborigines' departure. And while maybe that is a strange note to end this video on, that is where we're ending the video, because I think that the story is powerful in and of itself. Needs no explanation. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you're interested in more videos like this, where I kind of dig through my library and bring you some books that I liked and how they impacted me, definitely leave me a comment below. Like this video so that other people can find this channel and we can all have a book club together, and subscribe if you enjoyed it. I'm also doing the Federalist videos. If you did not find me through those and you found me through this video, you can go check out my channel. I am walking through every single Federalist paper. We're on, I think the next one coming out is 15. Also, you can follow me on my social medias. I will leave the link to my Instagram and my Twitter down below. And with that, I am looking forward to seeing you guys next week, and I'll see you later. Bye!